Hey everyone, Joey here, and today we're going to talk about my experiences using the AYN Thor for the last 4 months. And yeah, it's been 4 months for me because I had the review unit. I think I was the first person in North America to have one. And then I had my retail unit, which I have right here. And I have been using the AYN Thor religiously since I've gotten it. I know I've helped a lot of people out with guides as well. And if you're not using my AYN Thor setup guide, you're doing it wrong. Don't forget my tips video as well, and even more importantly, my video to help with the sound of the device, which is probably the most important of all three, although the setup really does help you. I have beaten a few DS games at this point: Metal Slug 7, Elite Beat Agents, Pokemon Black 2, newer Super Mario Bros. DS, and Pokemon Conquest. Awesome DS experience overall, and I had no issues at all with Elite Beat Agents, minus the fact that I'm not very good at it. Then I've beaten some other random retro games like Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, Pokemon Odyssey, Metal Gear Solid, and Golden Sun. Needless to say, I have hours and hours and hours of playing the AYN Thor, not including all the games that I have not beaten just yet, as well as the fact that I had a whole break there during the winter where I was just playing PC games. But anyways, I have used the AYN Thor in a lot of different capacities at this point, so I feel confident enough to do a 4-month after sort of review. I think to start, one of the things that I showed off in my review video about 4 months ago was that the Thor was a multitasking god. You have RuneScape on the bottom, you have Zelda on the top, that kind of nonsense. And while that did work out for a review to kind of show off what the capabilities are of the device, I can safely say that I've never used that sort of setup once in the last 4 months. That's not to say that you can't do that. You absolutely can brain rot your way into having 2 games playing at the same time if you wanted to, but it's just one of those things that looks cool until you actually do it. Although if you do have a game that's mostly idle on one of the screens, then it will be just fine, like RuneScape is. So it doesn't hurt to do it, it's just one of those things that I just never did. And the Thor can handle it if you wanted to. That being said, a TV show or movie on one screen while playing a game on the other, super viable, and it works fantastic. I highly recommend it. But for me, my second screen usage has mostly been for guides, both written and video. This was one of the main reasons that I wanted a Thor to begin with. And I'm super happy to just come back and tell you that using a guide on one of the screens and playing a game on the other is probably the best use case for a Thor that I can think of. Without the Thor, I was constantly going back and forth between my phone and my handheld for whatever guide that I was following, especially when it gets to an annoying puzzle section and you're just constantly looking back and forth on what to do and what not to do and all that sort of thing. The Thor, though, changes everything. Being able to control the game while scrolling or moving the guide is an absolute game changer. One device, both functions, and it's completely changed how I personally play my games, especially older retro games that give you zero idea of what you're supposed to do next and what you should be doing at this point. And I guess just to continue on that thought, I only use the top screen for gaming for a few different reasons. The first, the larger screen real estate, of course, but the second, and more important, is the 120 Hz benefits of response time and latency. And yeah, that still applies to retro games or content that isn't inherently 120 Hz. I do want to be clear about this one because I still see to this day people getting this wrong. Because the screen on the top is 120 Hz, even if you're playing a retro game at 60 FPS, you are getting benefits from that 120 Hz screen. There's a lot of benefits there for response time and latency. So it doesn't need to run a 120 FPS game for you to get those benefits from a 120 Hz screen. It's why my screen has never left 120 Hz mode. I'm not giving up that 120 Hz screen for anything in the world. It's the best part about the Thor. Now, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with playing games on the bottom screen if you wanted to. It's just not something that I found myself really wanting to do in the last 4 months. And so while I featured it in my review to show off what it can and can't do, I have to say that months later, that second screen is just not my gaming screen, personally. And so that's mostly why I'm sticking to 120 Hz mode all the time, because again, on that second screen, because it's 60 Hz being overclocked to 120 Hz, you get tearing and all of that when you're in 120 Hz mode, but if you're not using it for gaming, it doesn't really matter. For 3DS games and DS games that use both screens, that second screen rarely ever displays anything important that it matters, that it's tearing a little bit, so I don't really mind. But for games like Sonic Rush or Contra DS and all of that, where the two screens absolutely do matter and you're going back and forth, I keep that at 60 Hz mode. So I go back and forth, but 99% of the time I'm in 120 Hz mode until it's a dual screen game or something that's using that second screen where I need 60 Hz. Now let's talk about the controls, and there was a few things that I was worried about in my review and then a few I wasn't. I wasn't worried about D-pad or stick ergonomics because I'm pretty used to D-pad bottom devices, and it is actually my preferred layout. I'm actually happy to report that after 4 months, it still isn't an issue for me personally. I would obviously prefer a more offset layout for the stick and D-pad, but they don't have the space to do that without extending the controls out further. Either way, long story short, and you've seen the games I've been playing and beaten, I have no issues with the D-pad layout. That being said, one of my key gripes in my review was the boxy, flat style triggers, and that gripe still hasn't changed 4 months later. I still find the trigger design and everything to do with them to be the weakest part of this device by far. I've had to get used to them, I still am not used to them, but they absolutely are my number one issue with the AYN Thor. I talked about this at length in my review, so I'm not going to bore you with it again, but the triggers absolutely need a redesign in whatever Thor 2 they do. Honestly, overall, while I wouldn't call the AYN Thor completely comfortable, I wouldn't go that far. Like, it's not an Odin 2 Portal, it's not an Xbox Ally X, it's not one of those comfy devices. But I think it's serviceable. I think it's more than comfy enough, and I've played this for hours and hours at a time, and I don't really have an issue with it. For me, getting used to it has been pretty easy, but I think a lot of people might have issues with the ergonomics on this. It's going to be one of those things where it's going to be a person-to-person dependent type thing. And while I could point to a million different things I would do differently for comfort and ergonomics on this, I'm still having a great time with it, and I think that speaks volumes. And I think something important to point out when it comes to talking about comfort and ergonomics, I am using the TPU shell, the one that AYN sells, and I highly recommend it. This is probably my favorite accessory. I have tried so many different accessories. This is the only one that I think everybody should purchase. This is the only one that I think everybody needs. You don't need a case for a clamshell device. You don't need anything else. I wouldn't use the grip. I haven't liked any of the grips, but the TPU shell to me helps with grip and just helps with making the entire device more comfortable to hold and better. So save your money. You don't need to buy all these different accessories. Besides a stylus, you only need the TPU shell. Trust me on that one. I think I said it in my review, but with the Thor, I can recognize all of the faults that it has. I can recognize all of the issues. I can recognize all of the things that I would improve, that I would do differently to make it better. But that doesn't take away from how awesome the device already is. It's just things that I would have done differently. And I can see a path to how this gets better. But for what we have right now, the Thor is awesome. Now, since my review, the software has been updated many times over, and we have seen a lot of developers creating apps for the Thor and utilizing both screens. Lots of front ends have added support for the Thor, and it is being an easy spot for people to develop just random apps and things for. Now, AYN has fixed every bug that I can think of that was present in the original review, and they've added a lot more features as well. That being said, their previous few updates have been a little lackluster in the testing department. There's been a lot of issues. I am actually still on 2 updates prior, so I have not done the battery drain update and then the supposed fix for the battery drain update that changed the bottom screen to be a little bit different. So if you notice that in my video today, I am still a few updates back because I let other people guinea pig these things and then decide if I'm going to update. It seems like the most stable update, which I completely forget which one it is, I'll throw it up on screen, is the one that I am on right now. And I'm going to stay on this until I find out that it's better to move on. All in all, though, support from AYN and the community has been extremely positive over the last 4 months, and great to see. I can't really think of anything else that I would want added or that's missing feature-wise, things like that, which is always a good sign when it comes to a device. Because in my mind, one of the things the AYN Thor got right is the software and what you can do with it. They really put in everything that you would need. To bring this back to gaming, though, I think when we talk about the Thor, there is a lot of people that look at it and just say, I'll get a Nintendo 3DS instead. And I think that's missing the entire point of the AYN Thor. The Thor, for 3DS games at least, has pretty awesome compatibility across the board, upscaled and using both of the OLED screens. With a combination of Azahar and Citra MMJ, there is really maybe only a handful of titles that will give you some sort of issue that requires some sort of setting change or swapping emulator or whatever it is. But in my mind, even with that, there is simply no better device for 3DS games 4 months later, and that includes an original 3DS. Look, I know when I say this, there's a lot of people that are like, well, it doesn't have 3D. And so from my perspective here on this end, in my opinion, I've never cared about the 3D on the original 3DS, never liked it, never wanted to use it. So from my perspective, this is an easy 3DS replacement, but if you do want a 3D slider, then obviously this wouldn't be for you and replacing your 3DS. For everybody else that doesn't care about the 3D, this is an easy 3DS replacement in my opinion. Now, that same sentiment applies to DS games as well, of course. The Melon DS emulator fork that we all use has been updated many times over, to the point where even Pokemon Soul Silver no longer has those little black bars that showed up on screen before. That is all fixed now, and that's pretty awesome. Look, I love my 3DS and DS, but I can't say that I've looked at them, or that I've wanted to play them, or I've wanted to grab them since getting the AYN Thor. I'm sure there are people out there that want that and will go back to the original hardware for whatever reason, but it's just not something that I think applies on my end, and I think for a lot of people. The AYN Thor does 3DS and DS not perfectly, but pretty much there. Enough that any casual gamer, anybody who's just playing games, can do that and not have an issue with it. And I think at the end of the day, it depends on if you're playing games or nitpicking those games on if the Thor would be for you. But the beauty of the AYN Thor is that it doesn't just play 3DS or DS games. This isn't like an actual 3DS where you have to get some hacked up version of RetroArch, open AGB firm and try and play all these games and hope they run full speed and get Twilight DS and all of this sort of thing. The Thor just does everything. You can play Switch all day long if you wanted to. You can play Wii U if you want to. You can jump into PS3 if you want to. Hell, you can even play some PC games via GameHub if you wanted to. And the list goes on and on. And then we get to the known quantity emulators like PlayStation 2 and GameCube and PlayStation Portable and all of the emulators that we know runs well on this device. Those are all things that a 3DS can't do, and that's why it's never really made sense to me to compare this to a 3DS completely, because this is like a super duper 3DS. It's like a 3DS 20 years later, where it can do everything. It's entirely different. And at least on my end, I have dabbled into a lot of those systems, but I mostly stick to the retro ones all the way up to PlayStation 2 and GameCube, especially now that Dolphin for Android has gotten retro achievements. It's become one of my more favored ways to play Dolphin games, or GameCube and Wii. Dolphin on Android has been pretty good. And so, 4 months later, the AYN Thor is not perfect. It has issues, it has faults, it has all of that. But this is a staple for me now. If I have to pick one that's going to come with me everywhere I go, on an airplane, traveling, in my bag, all of that, it's got to be the AYN Thor. This is the easiest recommend I could ever give to a handheld. It's awesome in a lot of different ways, and it isn't something that you can just point to one thing and say it does this well. It does everything well. And that's all I got for you today. So don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about retro handhelds. Support me through YouTube membership if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.